So that's a tough act to follow. I really enjoyed that. Thank you so much, Marcia. So the topic that I'll be discussing is tidying your garden for pollinators and insects to overwinter. And, you know, I used to be one of those people until I became a master gardener who I always liked my garden nice and neat for the winter, and I'd always cut down all the, you know, pull out the annuals, cut down the dead perennials, get those leaves out of there, and just like let it nice and neat. And then last year when I was taking my classes, they were saying, no, don't do that, don't do that. And so this was really interesting to hear. So I'm going to tell you from a pollinator point of view what you should be doing and what you can do. And some people will still like to have a nice clean garden. So there are ways that you can compromise, you know, do this, but don't do this, or maybe change some of your habits. But meanwhile, here's a nice, this was taken yesterday. This is a bumblebee on my cosmos. There were a ton of bumblebees flying around, and not just bumblebees, not just bumblebees, but all types of bees were flying around. And a bumblebee is one of the bees that will overwinter in your in the leaf litter. And you know what I didn't do? There we go. So you need to cut me a little bit of break. I've been really, really busy, and I'm going to show you pictures of my yard, and we'll go from there. So there are all kinds of winter habitats for pollinators and actually for other wildlife, but you know, I'm talking about pollinators, so I'm talking about insects more or less, but it applies to other animals in the winter. Many of them like plant stalks and stems and leaves, and you'll hear that theme throughout. It provides a protective habitat for the insects, and I'll show you some really interesting pictures. And there's also a push for people that want to provide great habitats for pollinators, where they say leave it alone or leave the leaves, because those are a strong, great, wonderful habitat for overwintering insects. So I know you won't want to leave those leaves on your grass, but you can leave the leaves in your flower beds or in your vegetable beds, or you know, in your landscaping beds. They not only provide a nice overwintering habitat for insects, but they'll be protective for small birds and mammals. They protect the soil, and I'm sure all of you know this. And if you just planted bulbs, it's a nice insulation layer. It stops weed suppression. You know, when spring, when it's warming up again, if you have that layer of leaves, it's better than mulch. You don't want the big barky woody mulch. You know, use your leaves. And so here's a picture. This is a picture of cone flowers. I have this beautiful cone flower variation powwow, and it's a beautiful pink purple color. And I used to always cut those down to the ground. And you all know how much goldfinches love the seed pod of the cone flower. So I used to cut these right to the ground, and now I don't do that anymore. It's a, you know, an interesting picture out my window instead of bare ground, and it's a nice habitat for insects, and it also still feeds the birds. And here's hosta, you know, and I used to cut all that down and pull those big stalks out, and now you just leave the leaf debris. There's so many insects hibernating in there, and insects, they hibernate at almost every phase. You'll see every phase of an insect hibernating. Some hibernate as eggs, some hibernate as the larva, some as the pupa, and some as adults. And so you don't know, it is sometimes hard to see those things in there, so you don't want to just pull it out, because you're pulling out great habitats for your pollinators. And here's milkweed. This is a big, huge probably too big rosemary bush, but, and here's the milkweed, same thing there. I used to cut that down, and now I leave it to allow the pollinators and insects and other animals. You know, pollinators aren't just insects. There's other arthropods too that live in the debris, beetles and millipedes and spiders, and it also, the debris will protect even the worms and the snails. Now, I say it's protecting the snails, so you know that if you want to protect the good stuff, you are on occasion going to protect the bad stuff. So it's a, but you know, we're doing more harm than bad. More good than harm. Sorry. So some of the, I just got interested in this topic, so I wanted to show you some examples of what you might find in your winter garden. As I said, so some of the big pollinators are butterflies and moths, you all know that, and they hibernate over winter at different phases depending on the species. And most of the butterflies and moths use leaf litter for their overwintering protection. This is a mourning cloak butterfly that you might see in the winter months. This mourning cloak, the comma and the question mark are all types of butterflies, and they have this special type of, I want to say, insect blood that has antifreeze, so they won't freeze in the winter, and they can be out flying around in 0-degree weather. So I thought that was pretty cool. But, you know, and they will also climb under leaf litter for protection. There's also moths, this winter moth that doesn't even become active. It emerges from the ground in November and is active in the winter months. Then other butterflies will overwinter as a chrysalis, and this is a chrysalis of a sulfur butterfly, and see how it looks like a leaf, so you might not even know that it's there. Or a cocoon. And others overwinter as a caterpillar. And where I grew up, there were a lot of woolly bears. A woolly bear will just curl up under a leaf, and the leaf will provide the protection. And this is a variegated fritillary caterpillar. And the reason I showed that is because in my vegetable garden this summer, I had so many fritillaries, and I took pictures of them on my plants, and I have a variegated fritillary as my screensaver on my phone. So it was nice to know that by not cleaning up my garden, I was providing habitats for these wonderful pollinators. This is a red spotted purple caterpillar, and it mimics a bird dropping. And this is a full adult caterpillar, but before it gets to this stage, you know how they grow, they have instars. When it's not quite a full adult, it will curl up in a leaf called a hibernaculum, and that's how it will overwinter. So you wouldn't even know it was in your debris. So these are just a real short list of pollinators that will be overwintering in your garden if you leave your leaf litter there and your plant debris. And you know, the good thing about doing that, when they hatch, they'll be right there ready to go in the spring. So bees, as you know, bees are, there's over 3,500 species of native bees, and most people, when you think of bees, they think of honeybees, you know, that live in hives or colonies, but most of the bees and most of their native bees are single bees. They don't live in groups, and they don't live in colonies. And they too overwinter in your gardens. You may have heard of mason bees. I've heard of mason bees and leafcutter bees, where you can buy canes that are a specific diameter, and then you can pile those canes into a house and you have your own bee house. And Well, you can do the same thing with stalks from your garden. So here's an example of a goldenrod plant where they cut off the stalks, and if it's the right diameter, those bees will go in there and they'll hibernate for the winter. They like the dry, pithy, hollow stems, and they say if you want to try this, cut them at various heights, because then you have various diameters, and then you can attract different types of bees. Small carpenter bees like raspberry canes and wildflower stems, yellow-faced bees like bee balm and rose canes. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But we probably have all heard about the cavity nesters that, you know, like to go in the canes. But 70% of our native bees actually live in the ground. They nest in the ground. So if you're putting inches and inches of mulch on your garden beds, you're inhibiting these bees, these pollinators, from reaching the ground. So I would advise against the woody mulch or any mulch that has coloring in it or chemicals, and instead use leaf litter or compost, and make sure you have some bare spots so that bees can get to the ground. Bumblebee queens, now, you know, all the other bees die off, but bumblebee queens will actually burrow into the ground, and they like to sort of do it through a hole in leaf litter, so the leaf litter sort of insulate and protects their hole, and then they'll live there all winter. What else did I want to say? Bees will also, if you have a dead tree and it's not in danger, endangering anything, those are great habitats. I'm sure you've heard that for birds, but they're also for bees. Or if there's beetles that have made holes in logs, if the bee's the right size, it'll use the hole as its habitat to overwinter. And here is a sweat bee that I found on my Cosmos yesterday. And sweat bees will overwinter in the ground. And here's a hole of a sweat bee. So all these are fantastic pollinators. And if you make homes for them in your garden, then you'll have them in spring when you need them. Bees are one of the first things that I get when the earth warms up. They're one of the first insects to notice, and so they're one of the first things that will start the pollination process in the spring. Oh, and I just wanted to say this, that they overwinter in what's in an unanimated state called diapause. So you can think of it this way. You know how you can think of insects going from egg to larva to pupa to adult. Well, while they're overwintering in that unanimated state, they're not changing phase. So they'll go in as one phase, and say they go in, I don't know, as a larva. They may, in the spring when it gets warm, they'll stay a larva throughout the winter, but in the spring when it gets warm, that will be the impetus for them to change, and then they'll come out of the ground, you know, as a pupa or as an adult. But while they're in that state, they're not changing. So there's also two more pollinators that are exceptional for your garden, and one's called a hoverfly. This is a hoverfly, and it's a yellow jacket mimic, but it is a voracious aphid eater. So it's something really important to have in your garden. And they overwinter in decaying wood or abandoned holes or nooks and crannies of bark or, you know, logs. And they're called hoverflies. They're tiny, they're small, because they can hover in place, which I thought was pretty cool. And so that's one way you can tell it apart from the yellow jacket. First of all, it has two wings, has huge eyes, but it also can hover in place. So it won't sting you, it won't hurt you. it eats, its voracious appetite for aphids is as a larva stage or larvae. And so here's a hoverfly larva eating an aphid. Another important pollinator, which is also an insect predator, are ladybugs. So, and here's a 7-spotted ladybug. They overwinter as adults in cracks and crevices and under rocks and in hollow logs and under leaves. It's the same story that I'm repeating. And they huddle together by the hundreds for warmth and protection. And there's other beneficial pollinators. If you heard me talk before, I have a thing for parasitic wasps. And here's the larva of parasitic wasp. This is from my vegetable garden. Larva of parasitic wasp eating a tomato hornworm. So if you can provide a place for these types of insects in your garden, it's only beneficial. And then lacewings and midges are other predator insects that also are pollinators to an extent. So, so I'm telling you to leave all your debris behind, and you're saying, oh, but it looks ugly. I mean, this is my backyard again. This is zinnias that have fallen over. This is my cosmos that are half fallen over. This is dahlias that are, dahlias are tubers, but they're tenders. And this is just, oh, you can't really see what that is. Oh, I just lost what that weed was. That just is everywhere right now. Anyways, this is filled with weeds. So what should I do? Okay, well, you need to know your zone and when your first frost is, date of first frost, and when the hard freeze will be. So the first frost around here, it's usually, as Marcia said, it used to be around Halloween. Now it's later and later, but I think the date they give is the first week of November, but it's happening later every year. And a hard freeze, I don't even know if we got a hard freeze last year. I know we did eventually because we had that 20-degree weather once, but. So what am I going to tidy up in this year? Well, first I'm going to collect all the seeds because I collect my zinnia seeds. I will decapitate those. I'll collect my cosmos seeds. I've already collected marigold seeds because I have a visitor. I have vegetable gardens and I plant flowers in all my vegetable gardens. I have an extensive number of beds, and not at my house, at a different site. And so each bed gets usually either zinnias or marigolds. So I will tidy this up so nothing's leaning on the grass because I don't want to kill the grass because, it just looks nice and neat. I will pull out the weeds. I would recommend, they say don't even pull out the weeds, but I can never get out there early enough in spring to pull them before they go to seed. So I pull them in the fall. What I don't do is remove the leaves. I keep all the leaf cover there. I'll pull out my dahlias and get their tubers and store them. So collect your seeds, collect seeds of plants. You might have some natives that are really aggressive or non-natives. Like Marcia said, she takes care of her ivy because, ivy can be aggressive. And so you don't want it to end up anywhere. Divide your perennials, remove your invasives. I spent a day removing my neighbor's ivy that was encroaching in my yard and pulling out porcelain berry vine from my neighbor's yard, of course. Add your compost, add your mulch, don't add it thickly. You can use your debris as a mulch layer. Wrap anything tender. Some people wrap their fig trees. My fig tree is right next to my house, so I've never had to do that. And I had a fantastic year of figs this summer. You can do some pruning right now. Sometimes I prune my boxwoods in the fall when I have time. And I take in, you'll see what I call garden garnish. Some of these are purposeful because I have hundreds, as I'm sure all of you do, I have hundreds and hundreds of daffodils and tulip bulbs that will be in this garden in the spring. And the colors weren't really where I wanted them. So I used these markers. You can see this marker to say, I need more of this here. Oops, I didn't mean to click on that. I need more here or between here and here. So I use all this garden garnish. So I'm gonna make it neat and tidy at the border to the lawn, which I would recommend that you do. But if you can, leave, you know, leave the perennials and the annuals that have died and let them be the habitats for the pollinators. Leave the leaves, pull the weeds. I never clear my leaves until, what you can't see, if you go around this corner, I have a long bed of herbs, and that bed is just all covered with leaves. So I can harvest those herbs year round because they just don't die back because they have that extra protection. And I think that's it. I have
that was terrific.
There's one more picture I'm going to show you, but it wasn't really applicable to our area, but I thought it was so cool. I put extra pictures somewhere. So here's oh, and here's how you can create a habitat. Here's my fritillary friend. So this is a yucca plant, and these are bees at different stages as larvae. So they went in a hollow stem, and they're in different phases, and here's one almost ready to pupate. But I thought that was so cool, just from a yucca stem.